So wonderful. So I'm going to just put my video on. So I just wanted to welcome you all to the latest Herman Miller Insight Series webinar. Herman Miller's long history of research has shown us how people affect place and place affects people. And for today, this is going to be highlighted by our guest speaker, Sarwat Tasneem. And to help you re-engage after the event, we're going to have live illustrations along the way from Simon Heath. He's going to leave his video on so you can take a look at what he's doing. And I think you can actually enlarge his video dependent on how you're viewing it. So let me introduce the speaker to us. Sarwat is the founder of an organization called 14 Consulting, a social enterprise advising organizations internationally in creating healthy, diverse, inclusive working cultures. She's trained and worked as an interior architect within the corporate sector, consulting in thought leadership for global practices. And she's become a regular speaker and facilitator on psychology and environment, mental health resilience, and behaviors for inclusivity. And our guest today is Simon Heath, who is a corporate artist following a successful corporate career in operational management roles. Simon now works in a consulting capacity with some of the world's leading brands, using his leadership experience as an artist and communicator. So we're going to be sharing. Great to have you with us, Simon. So do take a look at what Simon's doing, and we will put him on full video later on, and you will be receiving a copy of Simon's work. So everyone, thank you very much for joining us. Those of you that have just joined, if you could turn your video off, that would be really useful. Thank you very much. Sarwat, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be speaking today. Good morning, all. Now, this talk initially really grappled with me, even though it's a subject that I know well. The past year has really turned the subject on its head. Identity is a personal stamp. It's part of our DNA. We relate it to the values and beliefs we have and the places we are from. This is a subject that resonates with me, not only through lived experience, but a journey that really began for me in this industry. You will all no doubt make your own informed decision in what it means to be inclusive. Social psychology and cultural ethics is my focus, which is why authenticity plays a big part in the explanation of this subject. I wanted to start by asking whether you are aware of the influences each and every one of you have in the workplace. Some of you have the privilege to be in the position of a decision maker. Decisions that impact how your team and colleagues feel and interact. The concept of identity in workplace affects us all. How it is projected, managed, and accepted can build relationships of trust and help productivity. Surprisingly to some, identities are also hidden to fit a culture, to be seen as an equal, or even to keep a job. What we're exposed to on the outside, the ideas, the environments, conversation, and behaviors affects who we are within. This has fascinated me for years. In a world that is data-driven, we can provide intellectual capital and answers that meet the criteria for a diverse workplace, and alas, the boxes have been ticked. Being inclusive, though, is an entire different realm altogether. We can also be conditioned to work in a manner that suits systems and institutions. Sorry, it's a bit of technical error there. Essentially communicating and accepting practices that belong to someone else's truth. It is the questions that have been not asked and the different perspectives that are viewed, or the opportunity to contribute, that can really limit a culture of inclusivity. We can make sense of perceptions and experiences through our own cultural lens. Exploring cultural or ethical frameworks, in inverted commas, Western work practice, can be particularly challenging based on the two ideologies, objectivity and individualism. Individualism cements that we are each unique and stand apart from one another. Objectivity informs us that it's possible to be free from all bias. So just let that digest for a moment. The reality is, what is happening in the wider society around us is beginning to adjust and reframe the beliefs we held to be true within the workplace as we know it, be it digital or physical. So how does this affect the workplace? Presenteeism costs 3 times more than sick leave, with over 71% of employees believing the pandemic has affected their mental health for the worse, and cases of depression and anxiety on the rise. Long-lasting changes in behaviour and emotional impact is expected. Global events have seen an upsurge of people paying closer attention to politics and how it impacts them and their loved ones directly, as it affects lives, the economy, our health, and the changing identity of a nation. We want to trust people more. We want trust to be practiced more than ever. We have seen how disproportionate inequality affects society. We want to feel connected, valued, and know that any form of change in the workplace will be for the better. Now, the implications of what's happening on a societal level has highlighted a global movement of academics, politicians, activists, and sports personalities, all projecting the message of equality and the right for all to have access to a fair, just, and diverse society. According to research, since the pandemic, young adults in the UK of no belief system are learning and asking more about spiritual practice and its benefits. Depression as a result of loneliness and daily habits have increased. Many have used the time to prioritize and embrace change. When they're communicating on Zoom, it's a window to be heard and seen and feel part of something, coupled with better informed employees from all ethnicities. So I'm talking about race, physical and cognitive ability, gender, sexuality, and belief systems. Now they all understand what their rights are as a result of what's happened in the past 12 months. Major corporates are now driving campaigns, reviewing company policy to increase and meet their diversity quota. So, you know, we go back to how leaders want to implement change. Leaders have been seeking inspiration from outside of working practice, whilst also acknowledging that diverse representation does not exist on their board. Survey after survey, we're learning how employees want to have a greater sense of purpose and be valued. So all of this is happening while conversations of the old and the new continue. Introducing the flexible office. Is this the end of the office? The future is remote. These are all predictions. What we do know is by having some form of in-person interaction, people benefit greatly from being surrounded by human connection in order to feel and practice value, engagement, affirmation, instruction, and for the simple pleasure of socializing. The smile, the banter, a sense of purpose and satisfaction. A McKinsey Diversity at Work report that I'm sure many of you read discovered that greater inclusion excelled productivity, employee satisfaction, and an increase in business as the company reflects the client and their customer base. The makeup and demographic of our society is diverse. More and more professionals and young adults who sit within minority groups are embracing their identities due to campaigning, diaspora, migration, and a higher relatability to their self-identity. Representation is good, I won't argue that point, but it isn't enough. A sense of belonging is what organizations must aim for. more pressure on employers and public declarations of doing better in the cause of unity, and mental health is a trending catchphrase alongside promises of change. For some, the reality is that these require hard truths. Prior to COVID, such an in-depth look at best practice, investment and time was another overhead and wasn't necessarily a priority. Clients have approached us, and this has been quite interesting. We've done, they've been saying to us, we've done the best we can to date, and we're aware there's more to do, but I don't think the industry is ready for this level of change. So is change solely difficult when we're presented with the scenario that we don't know or that we are afraid to understand? After all, we are experiencing the behaviour of change regularly when seeking life's pleasures, selecting a new holiday destination, trying a new cuisine, or redesigning our home. We're living through change now. We are riding a wave of beliefs, attitudes, and hardwired perception. And the common denominator is people. So we can ride down this line of this barreling wave and take a moment to observe and respect the force that is truly collaboration and the benefits of diverse knowledge, or wait for that wave to flatten so we can reach our comfort zone again. Now, we're listening to organisations addressing how to manage a more value and purpose-led style of leadership. Employees have expressed their needs, and research concludes that leaders are proving more effective through an emotional intelligence approach. Empathy. Baby boomers and Generation X respond better to autocratic leaders, and they see them as a sign of good leadership. Millennials and Generation Z also recognise good leaders as those who show interest in their thoughts. We're seeing the need to factor in the psychological experience of the encounters that they have at work in relation to what is happening in society. This is becoming more prevalent than before. One of the experiences is the physical space around them and the emotions and behaviours it triggers. When we look at the amount of time we spend indoors, our psychological behaviour is impacted by the space around us. Now, for example, working from home, we're living through the virtual and digital. Therefore, we're working harder to translate our identities through physiology and word. This isn't as easy as it sounds. I can't stress enough on that. Creating inclusion in the digital space is actually more difficult, as tone, presence, and instinct must be amplified. Configuration, scale, acoustics, and colour, for example, all of which can ignite or trigger emotions and feelings. Now, when we introduce the societal influences and overlay the experiences of groups that sit within the inclusion and diverse spectrum, we then begin to see what we know and what we don't know. Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone has the capability to design or implement strategy where everyone is catered for. In an ideal world, yes, that would be fantastic. However, innovation and creativity come once there is a real understanding of the psychological experiences of employees that have been systemically marginalized. It puts organizations and leaders in a position to question ethics versus their reality of the immediate world around them. Once you push past this, your collective diversity of thought widens your client base, outreach, and collaboration potential, therefore instilling and strengthening your culture and brand. Our understanding of ourselves is necessarily based on our comparisons with others. We come to understand who we are based on who we are not. Smart means little without understanding what not smart is. Appreciation is pointless without knowing ungrateful. Because we as a society champion individualism, we can be poor at looking at our own group memberships. In order to understand, we must push to work against our conditioning of what we believe inclusion at work is and why all groups membership matters. Now, to put this into context, we spoke with some management and some employees, past and prospective employees of a well-known brand whose award-winning offices are in central London. Some of the comments, which are quite interesting, included, "Our bar is the heart of our social culture. I knew it was going to be a work hard, play hard business, but it does mean I spend longer in the office than I should. We've got a table that can be used for ping pong, and that proves popular with the ones that don't drink." Another comment, "It looked really smart from the street, but the windows were tinted. Once I walked in and saw the colours of the branding across the furniture and walls, I knew it would affect my condition and productivity. I wasn't offered the job, but eventually declined. I didn't want to disclose that I was neurodivergent. My interview was after working hours. I arrived to the office to see a busy bar directly ahead, surrounded by many people. It looked great, but my heart sank as I don't drink and I couldn't see anyone that looked like me. Needless to say, I didn't make the second interview as I knew of my limitations. I was told I wasn't the right culture fit." So that particular company admitted to having a high turnover of people. These were a few examples of the implications of a culture that can create bias, self-doubt, and exclusion to varied cognitive abilities based on a combination of physical and cultural space. There are many, many more examples of this. So we know consultants work to a brief that represents the brand values, the people and services. The class inequality divide is growing, and white male graduates from disadvantaged backgrounds are least likely to be employed alongside visibly Muslim females. Working with several cohorts over the years and currently, the response to space can be intimidating and set the tone of the culture within. When entering high-spec office buildings for the first time, these white young male graduates from disadvantaged backgrounds have found that the experience has been quite uncomfortable. Foyers that didn't appear to have clear wayfinding in place, and where theatre and the expanse of the void cancelled familiarity and comfort. And for some of those young men, these experiences actually represented interactions and relationships of their working careers. So similarly, the social psychological perspective of the breakout space has been questioned in its purpose of inclusion for minorities. Now, when incorporating the psychological safety of employees in relation to well-being, does it provide the respite and choice of what feels communal, private, and familiar? We've been exposed subconsciously to how we behave, in particular through spaces and the conditioning of what we know. For example, we know if we wanted to find a place to contemplate or reflect, we seek a place that provides solitude, a park or a setting that imitates the benefits of outdoor nature, or maybe the quiet, reflective old church that I entered when visiting Damascus when it was still a bustling, integrated city, or meeting with a senior national leader in Iraq. It wasn't at all uncomfortable, maybe somewhat surreal, but what I found intimidating were the checkpoints and the burly 6-foot+ guards armed with ammunition that I had to pass through. So the one place I truly reflected upon my identity was at an event in Buckingham Palace, a grand symbol of our country, culture and history. Here I was, a first-generation daughter to migrant parents, a father who was in the British Indian Army, now suddenly walking up the grand staircase into the white drawing room. So I was in a space that looked familiar, but was unfamiliar. However, it proved that such symbolism can influence the behaviours of a person from any demographic based on the very nervous men and women around me. So this is an obvious and historical example of how status and design is used to reinforce an institution. Now, the word sanctuary has been raised many times in the workshops we have delivered. a concept that is universally understood and accessible to all groups, a space that isn't defined by scale or material or ideology or even location. When organisations fully understand what inclusion and exclusion is, the office has the capability to offer a place of sanctuary. Understanding the dynamics of inclusion and exclusion is the first step towards striving for it. So there are two different needs for belongingness and uniqueness in group environments. When an individual feels too similar to another member, they will adjust a little to feel unique. On the other end, when they feel too different from group members, they may try to assimilate and become more different from the group members. Sorry, they try to become more similar. Inevitably, there are variants in the experiences of inclusion and exclusion and the level of change that is applied. So this can be related to the concept of space and the intended functionality, how we feel and the behaviours it dictates. Some of us are feeling it right now, in fact, having worked from home for such a long period of time. Exclusion can also be in abstract forms of ideology and based on popular societal representations that are more hard to identify. At one level, exclusion can be transnational, based on geographical, race, religion, nationality or ethnic differences. At the societal level, it can manifest in stigmatization of certain groups. For example, what isn't the majority's norm, such as LGBTQ+, ableism, gender bias. Exclusion can also happen at the institutional level, where bases for inclusion and exclusion are defined by different institutions. So where there is high belongingness, but low value in uniqueness, the state of assimilation exists, the feeling or need to fit in. This is when the individual is treated as an insider in the work group and conforms to organisational or dominant culture norms and forfeits their uniqueness. So you can see this in the diagram. Where there is greater value in uniqueness and low belongingness, the state of differentiation exists. In this state, the individual is not treated as an organisational insider, but their unique character traits are seen as valuable. So we've heard maybe, you may have heard the sort of word tokenism. This is the sort of realm where this applies. And so that individual is required by the organisation or work group. High belongingness and high uniqueness equates to inclusion. So interpersonal and even intrapersonal exclusion exist, with intrapersonal referring to the inclusionary or exclusionary cognitions and behaviours that exist between people, and intrapersonal referring to the cognitive and emotional frames of an individual that serve as a basis of exclusion, such as someone with ADHD or a white person not having the necessary mental frames to think and feel like a person of colour, and vice versa. How one relates to self is derived from being members of specific social groups, in particular those that may be deemed to have higher perceived social identities. So within workplace inclusion, an individual need is to belong to a larger social group. That's what we're aiming for, which in turn is related to employees' psychological well-being. So we've gone through, so many exercises and heard the webinars and read a lot about it in the past few months. With this brings the seeking of acceptance and value in order to reach belongingness and individualism. So this applies across all diverse groups, women in male-dominated industries, for example. So leaders that focus on strength and recognizing the value in the difference to create that culture of inclusion. So to summarize, I know that might be quite a lot to take on. We're born to be engaged and to engage others, which is what trust is largely about. That has been an advantage in our quest for survival. Scientists now consider nurturant qualities in life, i.e. trust, cooperation, social ties, all these account for our success as a species. Cognition, so that's the brain chemistry, also influences our ability to trust. But also we know oxytocin, the happy chemical, is intrinsically linked to positive social connection. So with regard to this, we're far more likely, for example, to trust people who are similar to us in some manner. The researcher Lisa De Bruin proved this theory by creating an image of another person that could be morphed to look more or less like the participant's face. And this was tested on the participants. So a habit can cloud our judgment, is our tendency to see what we want to see. Psychologists call this the confirmation bias. Because of it, we actually pay more attention to and put more importance on the evidence supporting our hypothesis about the world, while downplaying or discounting the discrepancies or evidence to the contrary. So we're in a time now where we can't kid ourselves any longer in believing that politics, and I know people don't like that word, doesn't and shouldn't influence our working culture or environments. You know what? It does. It becomes political when mental health reforms aren't passed and the rights of the employees denied due to interpretations of the Equality Act. The problem arises when the culture and conditioning around us informs us that a particular group has more of a right above the other. So we've seen clients develop wonderful inclusivity campaigns and also utilize their spaces for a group that they have better understanding of or an affinity to, thus sending a non-inclusive message to all diverse groups. So call it what you want. However, the reality is, at the core of its purpose, it sits on a mantle of social justice and equality. So it's a huge factor in the way social groups and networks are now forming, in particular with access to information at the click of a button. The amount of times we've seen middle management rely on an ERG, an employee resource group, to lead this huge opportunity of culture change alongside their day job, and later wonder why progress is slow, still actually baffles me. It requires expert guidance and, most importantly, support. The way we interact, what we read, what we see outside of the workplace, within our communities, and developments across the pond or countries wide and far, has a ripple effect in how we see one another. In fact, we know this to be true based on the example of groups that aren't catered for or represented at board level. Given the choice as leaders and stakeholders, you have a say in who and what you want around you. So that's quite a powerful position to be in and a huge responsibility to carry. Are you prepared to work through the uncomfortable to find a nirvana that employees need? Working in well-being for diverse cognitive needs and the intersectionality of diverse workforce is an evolving space. One of the areas within inclusion and space on the rise since 2016 in particular is the misperception that spirituality is too controversial for workplace conversation based on political thought. So it's exactly for that reason that organizations are now addressing ways to create cohesion and inclusivity regarding faith and belief systems. So we've been working with HR and leadership in the US. We've been addressing this for some time, as currently 77% of the population currently affiliate to religion. So this fact, combined with conflicts around the world, have increased attention and interest from more US firms who are upscaling faith-based support for their employees. And companies who are leading the way have seen the benefits of encouraging employees to bring their full identity to work. So you would have heard the terminology, bring your full self. Everyone has their own way of explaining that. But the likes of Dell, Apple, and Ford, to name a few, have been leading. And here in the UK, the civil service are a fantastic example. I should stress okay, that this is not about promoting religious belief, but it's creating, in inverted commas, space for appropriate expression. So companies have been silently introducing methods without fanfare and have high employee engagement. Expert ethical guidance is recommended, though. In corporate America, they're actually at a tipping point toward giving the main religions similar attention to that given to other major diversity categories, e.g. LGBTQ+, Black History Month, International Women's Day. We're beginning to see an introduction here in the UK with belief networks. The danger is, managed in a modular way, it simply becomes a show and tell exercise or a show and tell calendar rather than incorporating it into policy and addressing it, addressing the behavioural habits that can be practiced. So recognising this in the workplace can be very powerful. It can be a fantastic contributor to an inclusive workplace culture. Those of us who have worked in the Gulf or the Far East, for example, we see this regularly, and we see how an office can be made up of a dozen more cultures easily, and the benefits of knowledge, respect, and diversity of thought, particularly within global brands. What we can learn from is the global approach. So similar to how we utilize skunkworks, really understanding the needs of that particular region and cultures. It's an appeal for personal transparency and authenticity, intended to spur creativity, teamwork, and a commitment to ethical behaviours. We've been advising the British Army in cultural and belief ethics for their regiments here, but also in building trust and understanding within their diverse teams, and when they're placed and deployed to countries completely alien to their world. The instinct to become a tribe or to become tribal can prove ineffective when trust and support is required from local communities. So this is an example of the act of collaboration and acclimatization whilst holding a sense of self-identity. So when we look at what is happening here in the UK, this is where it becomes really interesting from a design and behavioural change perspective. Companies are beginning to see that our social structure is shifting across, above and below. Globalization, investment, and access to education is changing the expectation and needs of the future workforce. It becomes part of the business case and transformational strategy. Best practice includes creating and ensuring safe work environment for all the employees, supporting talent mobility, consistency of employee experiences across business locations, and a consistent safety response to external events affecting employees. So again, that's just reiterating what's happening on the outside, what's happening in society and communities is affecting and will affect the way we work going forward. So whether you're working to address ageism and work culture, neurodiversity, so ensuring working conditions and environments don't exacerbate someone's symptoms, or LGBTQ+ and gender neutral spaces, all these serve to create a sense of belonging that are dictated by policy and what leadership feels right. Women, unfortunately, are still subject to inequalities and discrimination, the physical and emotional effects, the glass ceiling still exists. Men are also subject to gender stereotyping and are at higher risk of suicidal behaviour if mental ill health goes unnoticed. So we just have to think about the interactions that our current spaces, whether they're digital, physical, what we have in place for support. But there are some fantastic ableism initiatives challenging outdated functional design and workplace practice. The pandemic has actually helped this particular group engage. Notwithstanding race and intersectionality, this is a subject that really requires deeper understanding and is as important as any of the precursors. So no one wants to be put into a box, so to speak. The cognitive diverse landscape holds a field of options for creativity and inclusivity, as opposed to limitation, which is where we tend to immediately sort of arrive at or assume. Since last March, we've seen a desire from businesses in providing social value and investing in social impact. Now, the beauty of this from a design or even a corporate perspective is the ability to provide positive change within a subculture, simultaneously, the integration of knowledge and experience. And this benefits society, benefits our communities and the urban footprint. European and British culture in particular, our international group, is a myriad of thought, challenge, tradition, history, diaspora, and adoption. So it's making it a palette of opportunity and ideas. Yet too often, inspiration and insights that are planted amongst us internally and externally of the workplace are seldom ventured into, missing out on the reasons that makes our society unique and rooted in belongingness. So working to inclusion in the workplace, people say, so what do we do? But working to inclusion in the workplace also translates as challenging inequality. Unfortunately, presenting data as we would, for other projects or initiatives, presenting data of inequalities doesn't necessarily lead to decision makers pressing the button on organizational change. It takes a collective approach and the action of coming together, supporting one another and being an ally, finding a balance. I use the analogy of a cubist painting when discussing diversity. You have your desired image, but through the imperfect layered approach, instead of depicting objects from a single viewpoint, you can depict the subject from a multitude of viewpoints to represent the subject in greater context. And the result is extraordinarily perfectly imperfect. Diversity means many things to many of us. Someone once said that architecture matters, but it can't insulate people from political circumstances around them. I don't agree completely. Architecture and workplaces can actually represent and embrace the cohesive society we want. How those spaces are used and the outcome and behaviours generated has the potential to change a narrative of a people within society, each voice positively contributing towards the organisation and the community we aspire to have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarwat. Sarwat, I wonder if you could stop sharing your screen as well, please. Therefore, hopefully people can then get to see. So if, bear with me a second, you can choose to go to a grid view and you'll see. Simon, I wonder if you could maybe give us a little, are you able to move your camera a little nearer your work, or is that? And wow, and there's Sarwat as well. Look at that. That's pretty amazing. That is just incredible. So thank you very much, Simon, for that. And we will digitize that, and that will be with you tomorrow. It's a great way of capturing what was pretty amazing insights from Sarwat. And thank you for being brave enough to challenge lots of those things that people won't challenge. So we will follow up this with an email, which will be a link to the PDF of Simon's work, but also people are asking if they can have the slides, but we will let you know whether that's possible, and we may even share the video of the talk so that you can share it with colleagues as well. But there are some questions for you. Someone first of all observes that there's a book called The Culture Code, and that's a good book on the sense of belonging at the workplace. I don't know if you've read that. Have you had any comments on that, Sarwat?
Yeah, there's many references and fantastic books out there, and The Culture Code is one of them. And I think sort of what I try to do today, and when we talk to clients, is really delving into and you quite rightly use the word challenge. It's the uncomfortable. The reality is that we're living in, we're living in Western culture. And so we have our own rules and expectations, and it's simply by not even having a conversation with somebody that may be seen as the other or has that difference that we miss out on development for culture change. And historically, it hasn't really been a behavior that we practice in the workplace. And sadly, it's taken global movements, it's taken the pandemic and the horrible events of last summer for people to realize, actually, we need to check in, we need to ask, we need to actually start understanding the viewpoint of our colleagues, of of talent coming through. So it's really a case of being honest and wanting to understand. That's the first step. It's whether you want to be accountable for positive change and whether you want to be responsible and be that ally to make it happen.
Thank you. I have a question from Maggie. What are your favourite recent examples of ways that workplace has been adapted or designed for inclusion and engagement of teams with this new societal way of working?
It's really been, I would say it's for us, it's having conversations with leadership. So it's leadership not solely relying on HR or other departments to deal with the people aspect. And it's having leaders that have said, okay, let's put a Zoom call together, invite the whole workforce, and I want to hear from them what they want. What are we not doing right? So it's those very simple questions, and it's dispelling that image of what leadership is as well. And I always sort of say to directors or people on the board, every opportunity for change is also an opportunity for you to build trust with your employees, because far too often there is that disconnect. So in the first instance, it's having real, honest, open dialogue.
Thank you. If you were to recommend someone a site to visit, is there a physical embodiment of what you're saying where you saw architecture that was inclusive? Is there anywhere that you could call out specifically?
Yes, actually, and it's been interesting because you actually had the individual who drove that change on one of your seminars, and that was Neil Usher. So it'd be I know lots of people refer to the Sky offices, but that's a very good example. I don't know what's sort of happening in terms of sort of intersectionality and what I spoke of today, but if it's a space that practices what we have covered from a physiological aspect, it's a very, very good example. It's really bringing the outside in. It's having a space where you see the familiar, you see these different communities, and with that, the behaviors will change. So it's about, we talk about behavior nudges. So that behavior nudges being in the space where you think, okay, that looks comfortable. I have a choice. I have options of where I can sit. I'm, wanting to focus on this deadline. I've got a place to sit if I need to contemplate. You know what? I'm not having a great day. I'm going to go to that space. So it's really about option and choice. It's allowing the employee to decide what is right for them.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions about statistics, Sarwat. One is any stats or insights around how it affects mental health, inclusiveness and mental health? And there are any stats around how it affects productivity as a result of addressing these issues?
Yes, we'll be happy to share the statistics that, or the surveys that we have been leading the past 6 months. So we've been working with communities, workplace communities across different continents with regard to inclusion, diversity, and productivity. And so to date, we're looking at the digital space. So it's the working from home. So I'll be happy to share that with your link after this.
Great, thank you very much for that. Change management's become more pertinent in organizations to ensure alignment of corporate direction and even cultural transformation. How do you think employees' diverse individualities can actually coincide with what organizations aspire to be, whatever that might be? How do the two align?
It's part and parcel. It's part and parcel. We can't address change management if we're not actually actively looking at what's happening to and with our employees inside and outside of the office. It's an intrinsic part of change management. Diversity, that too often diversity or D&I has been used as or seen as an initiative. I spoke of employee resource groups, and it's a tick box scenario, and that it hasn't worked. When you're having these conversations, when you're talking about progress and you're talking about opportunity, especially to progress in terms of leadership, that there isn't any separation. You know, change management has to incorporate a very thorough diversity and inclusion policy as part of that, and that's where we are now. And I think one of the uncomfortable conversations that we've been having quite regularly is, you know, what do employees want? So it's that constant term of equality. It's about not feeling part of. I'm not just talking about the diverse groups or the minorities. It's also sort of pushback from the employees that don't sit in those diverse groups. So these are sensitive conversations, but inevitably they will be. But that's what drives change. We can't stay in our comfort zone.
Thank you. Have you had any thoughts around how you improve inclusion whilst working remotely? Is another question we've got.
Yeah, it's about empathizing. It's about being authentic. Now isn't the time to sort of work from home and assume that the same structure or schedule has the same benefit or effect as it did prior to the pandemic. You know, it's reaching out. So it's all about, connectivity, frequently having conversations with your teams. You'll be surprised, if you ask your team, let's just have a catch up, let's just have a coffee and find out what's going on with you at home. So it's really bringing everything back down to, the human approach, and, using the beauty of understanding and, empathizing and listening. I know it's difficult on a Zoom, but it's really about that ability to reach out. It's as simple as that.
Thank you. I'm going to give you one final question. Someone picked up on a comment to ensure that workspaces do not exacerbate someone's symptoms. Can you give any more details on this, such as good or bad examples?
Yeah. So that was in reference to sort of the neurodiversity space, and it's a new subject that companies are now finally addressing. And what's interesting about neurodiversity is that we have many employees that haven't actually wanted to disclose that they're neurodivergent, for example, ADHD, or having dyslexia. But with the reference I made was about space and color. So for somebody who is neurodiverse, these bright colors of yellow and bright orange can trigger a very uncomfortable sensation, and different individuals experience it in different manners, but it has an effect on their productivity because their view can be blurred. They cannot see, and the physiology and the actual psychological impact creates anxiety and stress, but also textures. Certain textures can have an effect on somebody who is neurodiverse. So it's really about it's an exercise that you can also work or incorporate acoustics, lighting. But as I said, these aren't limitations. These are opportunities to be creative and to be inclusive.
Sarwat, thank you very much. There is a question about any books that you would recommend, and I would ask you if there are any good books that you'd recommend that we include that in the follow-up email as well. Just any.
Gosh, yeah. So for me, I think to get a really a basic understanding would be Haralambos, the perspectives of sociology. So that's understanding, social strata, class division, race, gender, but also Patricia Hill Collins. She's absolutely fantastic in the area of intersectionality.
Great. I just wanted to say thank you very much, Sarwat, and thank you. I think you've given us lots of food for thought. Simon, I don't know if you wanted to unmute yourself, and I would love to hear from you. Just a minute. How was that for you to be able to capture that onto your pieces of paper there? How was that for you?
Thank you, Mark and Sarwat. That was really fascinating stuff, and for someone trying to capture it live, it's incredibly complex and deep. So I've kind of struggled sometimes to keep up, but in part because I'm so enthused by what I forget that I'm supposed to be doing this because what you were saying was so amazing. But yeah, just things that stood out. That idea that we can build a place that's is a sanctuary where people are able to appropriately bring themselves to work, and the whole concept around leadership that builds trust and a sense of belonging. I think those are the sort of threads that really came through for me, and that obviously the global world has encroached on our personal worlds in a way like never before, perhaps, and I think that's given an opportunity for fat, middle-aged, bold blokes like me to have a greater sense of awareness of people who don't look like us. So I think it's all absolutely incredible stuff. Thank you.
And Simon, thank you very much for that. Sarwat, thank you for excellent insights. And everyone, thank you for taking the time to join us. I wish you all a very happy day. I've put a link in the chat box to our other events. We've just added a new one today, which is looking at it's the whole idea of endorphins and dopamine and all those kind of things, and how do you make a resilient mindset. So kind of related in a way to what we've heard today. But our next speaker in 2 weeks is Rob Harris, who's looking at offices becoming digital hubs. So thank you everyone for joining us. It's kind of the kind of round of applause now is if you look at the chat box. I always find that the chat box is now, all those thank yous really make a difference. So thank you everyone for joining us. I'll leave it on for a minute or two so you can enjoy the thank yous and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
And thank you, Simon and Sarwat. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. It looks absolutely awesome.